This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
I'm at Jason Hartman's event, and I found that this event is really helpful because I'm totally a newbie to real estate investment. And so far I found it extremely helpful in looking at this as a sort of less risky way of investing in real estate. And it's been really an amazing event for me because all the content has been extremely helpful with what I want to get into.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1951. Today we have got a great returning guest for you, and that is none other than the young and incredibly knowledgeable Rudyard Lynch. He will be speaking at Empowered Investor Live this weekend, so I hope you're joining us for that. But be sure to check out his YouTube channel. It has almost 500,000 subscribers, and he covers all sorts of great topics. His latest video I especially liked because I couldn't agree more. Why is modern dating broken? But that's not what his channel is about. That was a very tangential video, definitely not like his normal stuff, where he talks about family structure and how it drives ideology, how disgust drives ideology, history, and the right side of the political spectrum, negative effects of science on society, and how baby boomers ruined society. So really interesting. And he talks a lot about geopolitics and economics. He actually creates his own maps so that he can talk about history. And this one was especially interesting. What if America never exported its industry? What if we were a much more insular country and kept everything at home and everything was made in America? That was a fascinating video, and he's just got so many of them. So he is here with us today, and of course he will be speaking this weekend at Empowered Investor Live. And speaking of which, I have a few housekeeping items for you if you are attending the conference, or if you're attending the live stream, or if you purchased the recordings of the conference. This applies to all of you. And if you haven't done all those things yet, maybe you want to do one of those at least, if not a couple of them. But here is our tentative schedule. This is a draft. We don't have the final one yet. But Friday, we will have registration and exhibits open at noon on Friday. So grab an early lunch and come down, register, enjoy the exhibits, talk with some of the local market specialists, the property management teams, our asset protection attorney. We'll just have a bunch of exhibitors there for you. And we will start, hopefully, at 1:30, okay? You know how it is, starting an event on time. But if you are down there at, say, noon or 12:30, I think we'll certainly be able to start by 1:30, no problem. And our afternoon session will begin. We've got a bunch of great content. And our keynote speaker for Friday afternoon is none other than the great Sharon Lechter. She has written many, many books. I think over 30 books, if I'm not mistaken. And we are providing one of her books that will be in your goodie bag. So you'll get that one for free. And of course, she's written several of the Rich Dad books along with Robert Kiyosaki, but a bunch of her own work is just fantastic. And we'll wrap up, we'll have a dinner break, cocktail reception, 6:30 Friday evening. Then we have kind of a fun and enlightening general presentation Friday evening. After the cocktail reception, yes, our speaker said he didn't mind. In fact, he is totally okay with you being a little buzzed. So if you want to have a drink or two, and you can wander into the presentation on the power of the mind. And that'll be Friday evening. And we'll wrap up Friday evening about, 9:30 or 10 p.m. And that'll be great. And then Saturday morning, registration is open at 8 a.m. in the green room for pro members, VIP, and elite ticket holders. We are serving a breakfast and general admission. The entire event begins at 8:30. And our keynote speaker for the morning session will be Tom Wheelwright, Rich Dad CPA. He's been on the show several times, lots of great insights, and he is going to be awesome. We'll break for lunch around noon, and then we'll have our afternoon session. We've got a whole bunch of speakers Saturday afternoon, and our keynoter is Ken McElroy. We will have a little bit longer break Saturday afternoon, so you can kind of network with other attendees and the exhibitors. We'll have some sweet treats and so forth like that. Then we'll have a dinner break, cocktail reception, 7:30 on Saturday night. So you have a little longer dinner break. And then the band will start at 8 p.m. and you can dance the night away. And, if you want to wear some cool disco attire or, whatever, feel free to dress crazy for that. And remember to practice your air guitar, because we are having an air guitar contest with prizes that you'll want to win. Sunday morning, we start at 8 a.m. That's when you can come down and mingle at 8 a.m., have coffee and breakfast for pro members, VIP, and elite, served in the green room. And Rudyard Lynch, our guest today, will be speaking Sunday morning. And then we'll have a lunch break on Sunday, of course. And then our afternoon keynote speaker is George Gammon. And then we have a whole bunch of panels and things like that on Sunday afternoon. And we'll bid farewell around 5 p.m. on Sunday. So be there no later than 1 p.m. on Friday. Okay, that's the latest you want to arrive. Ideally, come a little earlier and grab an early lunch beforehand. And we hope to start promptly at 1:30 Friday, because we just have so much content. You get behind at these events and it's like a domino effect. One gets behind and another gets behind. So we really want to start on time on Friday. And we're just going to have a great time. So we look forward to seeing you. If you, for some odd reason, still don't have tickets and you want to come to the live event, we'd love to see you there live. And you can go to jasonhartman.com or the direct site, which is empoweredinvestor.com/live. And grab your tickets today. Last call on those. And you can grab live stream tickets if you can't attend live. And after the event, we'll make the recordings available as well. Also, our Empowered Investor Pro Cruise is coming up, and it's just, a month and a week away, like five weeks, maybe almost 6 weeks away. And it's going to be a great time, a Caribbean cruise on one of the largest cruise ships in the world. So it's going to be a phenomenal event. Go to empoweredinvestor.com/cruise and grab your tickets for that. This is just a very small group, people. This is not a big event. It's just going to be a fun vacation, and everybody who joins gets a investment counseling session, a coaching session from me personally at sea. So I can only do a limited number of those, obviously. So those are individual sessions with me, very casual environment, and we'll just have a great time doing that. So be sure to join us for that. empoweredinvestor.com/cruise. And for those of you joining us this weekend, either on live stream or live and in person, we look forward to seeing you. And by the way, those live streaming tickets, so many of you asked that we did decide to make them available, and those are available at empoweredinvestor.com/live. Just look for the live stream ticket and you can join on the live stream if you're not coming in person. Okay, so without any more wait, let's get to Rudyard Lynch. It is my pleasure to welcome a guest back to the show, and that is one of our speakers at Empowered Investor Live, which is coming up in beautiful Scottsdale, Arizona, and that is none other than Rudyard Lynch. Rudyard, welcome back. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Glad to be back.
It's good to have you, and you are coming to us from your new home in Los Angeles. I know you're just getting settled there, so we appreciate you kind of taking time out for us. And for those who don't know, Rudyard has an awesome YouTube channel where he dives into history, geopolitics, economics, monetary policy, just a ton of fantastic issues. He's got almost 500,000 subscribers at the ripe old age of 20 years old. So we're, oh, you're 21 now?
Yeah.
Okay, so now at the cocktail party, he can legally have a drink. Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, hey, it's great to have you. And, we were talking a little bit, Rudyard, off air about the cryptocurrency debacle. And I mean, all of this craziness that's going on in the world. I don't know how much you follow the FTX scandal, but, just tell us about your thoughts on cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, et cetera.
I follow it not as an expert, but as just something I passively pay attention to. And the thing that crypto really reminds me of is the financial bubbles of 300 years ago. And in the early 18th century, financial markets were pretty new. And so people really didn't know how to manage them well. And you had all these schemes where, for example, in France, they tried to establish a colony in Louisiana. And the French government, and this was all built off basically government projects to pay off their debt from the War of Spanish Succession. And there was this giant financial bubble from the attempt to try to establish a colony in Louisiana. But then it actually happened, and some vast percentage of the French nation's economy went into it. And they didn't realize that Louisiana was a swamp. And so France's economy blew up. And it actually was a big causer for the French Revolution 80 years down the line, because the French had all these corrupt dealings with their government that made no one trust their financial system. England had a similar thing called the South Sea Bubble with trading with the Spanish colonies in South America. Scotland tried to make a colony in Panama, but 80% of them died of malaria the first 6 months. So you had all these schemes to establish colonies that blew up. And I read a history of financial bubbles. And the case is it normally happens with some new technology or some new part of the market. And people overestimate its value, thus creating a bubble. Then the currencies goes away. And I think crypto is pretty similar because there's no actual functionality for crypto at this point. And I think this is something I'd like to stress, where you can't go to Walmart and buy groceries with crypto. And that's what people actually need. But also a point Jason made that's really interesting at the start of our conversation, and I really agree with this, is crypto is a currency backed by a lot of online nerds, if we're being honest. And currencies are backed by aircraft carriers and nuclear missiles. And Jason had a really good point that it's the equivalent of a currency for that government, where the US government's biggest product is the US dollar. And so if they lose that, they lose so much of the US's power. I hang out with a lot of crypto maximalists, and I've heard the argument that crypto would buy militaries to fight the US government. And right. I just can't believe people are that delusional, especially smart people.
It's really hopium, that's what it is. And as I've always said, and my opinion has never changed on Bitcoin specifically. And to be fair, Bitcoin really is different than every other cryptocurrency. That is in a class by itself. So I want to make that distinction for people, but it all blends together to some extent as well. And as investors, we invest in real things that are reliable, that have a history that goes back thousands of years. The exact idea of buying properties and renting them to someone else is millennia old. Okay, it went on in ancient Rome, and I recently on a podcast talked about how they used the same income to rent ratios we use today in ancient Rome. Wow. They basically said, if you're going to rent this house, if you want to call it a house, I showed a picture, it's about a third of your income can go to rent. And that's about the same as it is today. And how many, the denarius, right? Do you have? And that's how much you can spend on rent. So it really is interesting, but I would love to be wrong about it, because if Bitcoin could take over the world, and if there could be a decentralized currency that wasn't under the auspices, meaning we're under the control of these central bankers, these governments, they use that to manage us like puppets on a strings. They devalue our savings. They change our behavior. They cause us to spend or save based on the inflation rates. And when they make their own cryptocurrency, and that is right around the corner when the CBDCs come out, the central bank digital currencies, they will have so much control over us because it's programmable money.
Yes.
I mean, is that going to be checkmate on the human race? I think it might be.
That's really an interesting point. And have you ever read Ted Kaye's Manifesto?
No.
The Unabomber, where I just want to
Ted Kaczynski.
Before the FBI.
Oh, that's from a long time ago.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I am definitely familiar with the Unabomber.
Yeah, where
anti-technology he was. Yes.
If the FBI is listening, I want to say I'm not condoning terrorism, but also I really like it reminds me of two things where I really like his point that at this point, the human race can either turn towards decentralization or turn towards genetically engineering humans to be subservient to a giant, basically slaving ruling class. And that sounds dramatic, but I think there's an argument there. And the reason I say that is you have these cycles of history, and David Graeber has a really interesting point about this in his book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years.
I love that book.
You have times where power can control capital and where capital is more powerful than power. And so we're coming out of a 500-year period in which power can control capital. And the previous example, that's the classical world, like the rise of the Roman or the Chinese or the Persian empires. And in eras where we have currencies like the ones we have now, where governments can control capital, you see the growth of larger empires, larger corporations, all that stuff, because you see the ability to have scale be much more powerful. And where you're larger scale, you can conquer your smaller competitors. But the other example of that is something like the Middle Ages or the early Iron Age, where capital is more powerful than power. And so in those eras, you see power disintegrate, where in the Roman Empire, it stretched from Britain to like Iraq. But in medieval France, the King of France had trouble holding on to even areas that were 20 miles away from Paris. And so in the Middle Ages, when capital was more powerful than governments, the force of capitalism was more powerful than these individual monarchies. And I'm hoping that we're on a trend towards a system like that, where capital and the force of capitalism is more powerful than centralized governments. But I do think due to genetic engineering, I really worry that since we have the power of gods, that the powerful will genetically engineer humans against what our inherent natures are, where let's say the cycle of history would determine that we'd go through an era of more decentralization, because these things fluctuate back and forth, where when systems get too centralized, they become inefficient. And when systems get too decentralized, they become inefficient. And for the Roman Empire,
there's a sweet spot there.
Exactly. Yeah. And for the Roman Empire, it got so big that its people became decadent. They couldn't fight wars. There was no incentive to really do anything right because there was no competitor. And so Nero did horrifying things. So did Caligula. And the thing that your question reminds me of is it's like what the Roman Empire did, where the Roman Empire lost all its competitor. It became a military dictatorship. And then they just started inflating their currency like crazy. And the Roman government would just make their currency completely useless, where by the time you get to the 3rd century AD, they would literally pay soldiers in food and salt because the actual currency was so useless. And even the government at that point realized, like, there's no point in actually even using our currency anymore. And what the Romans ended up doing is they used all this legal force to make people work rather than actual financial incentives, because the Roman Empire at its height had an incredibly developed economy. But once their currency didn't work, they put in all these laws and they became socialist, actually. People don't know that. The Roman Empire towards its end was one of the most socialist economies of all time. And they said you had to work the same job as your parents. If you left your landlord's lands, you'd have your limbs cut off. Right. There are a couple of jobs like supply chains where if you had to bring grain from the countryside or North Africa to the major cities, that was a hereditary job because they couldn't keep people doing it. If you were a government bureaucrat, that was a hereditary job. And so the Roman Empire tried to use all this force to make up for their lack of a functioning economy. And that really broke their society. And it's why the barbarians were able to conquer Rome outnumbered 10 to 100 to 1.
Yeah. You know what you're saying is so interesting, the parallels to a great book by the late Alvin Toffler, which was called, I read several of his books, but this one was PowerShift. And he talked about the 3 forms of power throughout history. The first form of power was the ability to inflict violence. That's the most base grade form of power, the lowest form. And then the second form that really came into being in the Industrial Revolution, but further back than that, of course, and you've cited some examples, is the power of capital, right? The ability to control people with money. And then the highest grade form of power, which sadly is one that I am very concerned about nowadays, and I'm always ranting about it, and listeners know what I'm about to say, it's the information age, right? The ability to control information. And you gave all examples of that in what you just said, because it sort of circles back. When capital no longer works, we revert back to violence, right?
Yes.
And if you think about it, that's the essence of every law. If you don't pay your taxes to the government, eventually people with guns will show up at your door, right? And take you to prison. And that's violence, okay? And it always devolves into that. But the interesting thing about, capital, well, violence first, eventually you destroy the thing you're trying to control with violence. So that's not a very bad form of power. Capital, you eventually run out of money, even in the deepest pockets run out of money. But with information, the game is different, and it can be an infinite game, because the same piece of information can be used by both sides. The same amount of capital cannot be used by both sides, and the superior ability to inflict violence cannot be used by both sides. One is going to win, one's going to lose.
I think it's a three-tier thing where the least functional societies use force, and across human cultures, the most primitive societies are fear-based. And so they enforce moral conduct by saying an evil spirit will destroy you. They enforce political conduct by saying the king will cut your arm off. And force is the most primitive. Above that is market, where you do things through financial incentives. But the problem is that just through that, you can't have a trusting society. And a society that's just based off financial incentives is one where people don't look out for their neighbors, where no one's willing to fight to the end for their country. And the top one's ideas. And I think I'd push it even further than information. Religion is a kind of information that gives a society a glue that holds itself together. And the most functional societies use all three. They have a coherent religion that gives them values. They have a market system that incentivizes them. And then they have a system of force. And as civilizations decay, they first lose religion, then they lose the market incentives, then it's just force.
So where are we on that continuum, right? I think we all know the answer.
We're on the second going into the third, because we don't have any shared values as a civilization. And I mean, one of the things my right-hand man likes to say, a society without a strong religion is like a nation without a capital, where you just don't have the shared values. I mean, irrespective of whether or not you believe in God or the spiritual world and all that, you should have shared values in a society. And once you lose those shared values, people do their own thing and there's no sense of consensus. And I think we're in the second level now, which is financial, where most of our society, people do things for purely financial reasons with no sense of broader purpose. And we're gradually degrading into the third, which is force, where if you look at our elites, they're just using basically writ of repression at this point to hold power. They'll cancel people on the internet they don't like. Right. If you say a different opinion, your life is over.
Oh, I mean, they're just pillaging. It's unbelievable. This kleptocracy is the better word, that we're in. I mean, they're just hollowing out the middle class. It's a global phenomenon. It really begs the question, how do we protect ourselves? What do we do? What is the solution to this? The first answer to that question is awareness, right? And a lot more people seemingly are becoming aware of this, which is great. One of the great things about the crypto revolution, well, I don't know if it's fair to call it a revolution, but the awareness of cryptocurrency, a lot of people now understand the Federal Reserve and central banking and fiat money. When I started talking about this stuff in 2004, no one cared. No one knew what I was talking about, but when Bitcoin started to get a footing in maybe 2012, 2014, people broadly understand this. The guy that comes over to service your air conditioning now is into this, right? So that's a really good side effect that people understand that. So that's the monetary thing, but there's all these other aspects of just massive power grabs that are happening to us. So any thoughts on how to protect ourselves? Now, this is some of the stuff hopefully you're going to talk about at Empowered Investor Live. Shameless plug, but Rudyard is speaking there, and I can't wait to see your talk and your many slides that I'm sure you'll have. Yeah, but yeah, any action steps or thoughts there?
I mean, I definitely agree with Jason here, where awareness is the top thing. Where if you don't know how something works, it's you're just totally blind to it. And imagine going to a room and trying to fight an animal, and you don't know what kind of animal it is.
Right.
And I mean, I'm not an expert in investing, but I'll just tell you what I've invested in. I invest in things that are stable assets that have to always be there and have to have the government support. So I've invested in agriculture, I've invested in mining, I've invested in the military industrial complex. Let's say the US dollar hypothetically were to become completely useless. The government will still find a way so that people get fed, so that the military has guns, stuff like that. I really do worry about inflation. And that's something that everyone sees now, and it's completely obvious, but I've been harping on this for years. Our government seems to have no understanding of how finance or money works, where, I mean, I don't know if the statistic is true, but I've seen it from another YouTuber I really trust. We had $4 trillion in circulation in 2020. Now we have 18 trillion. The US dollar is, in some ways, it's magical that people keep on buying it because we're the greatest empire in the world, but it's going to have to fall through at some point. And I could make a lot more actionable steps if you gave me more time to think about it, but I just say awareness and nail yourself to the ground, to something real. And I mean, as a real estate investor, I'm sure that's music to your ears.
Yeah, right. Well, that's what we like. But, you know, real estate isn't perfect either. I mean, they can change the dynamics of real estate with interest rates, as they've done recently, right? They can change the dynamics of real estate with legislation. However, that fear, I think, is really quite overblown, because as people have been saying that for decades, and I'm sure longer, but the decades I've been around, I've been hearing that. And it just doesn't happen because when something is so widely distributed and owned by so many people as real estate, so many people have a stake in it that nobody wants to hurt themselves or vote against themselves, which interestingly, one of my Bitcoin maximalist friends, who's probably listening to this right now, actually, I won't mention his name, what he says when I say, well, you know, Bitcoin isn't going to make it. Right? You know, I hope I'm wrong, but I just don't know that it'll make it, right? And he says, Jason, the thing you have to realize is it's not the government against Bitcoin. It's that all the people in the government that own Bitcoin are not going to vote against themselves, right? And so that's interesting, you know, and that's definitely true with real estate, because everybody in the government owns real estate, right?
Yeah.
You know, Bernie Sanders, the man of the people, has 3 beautiful homes.
I think she's got multiple properties.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so they're not going to vote against themselves. So we have their own self-interest to protect us, to some extent, right?
I've told you how the historic cycles I talk about with inflation affect real estate, right? Where there's normally, because inflation drives high real estate because people try to get a stable asset. And what I would expect is to see a really high growth in real estate over the next couple of years. And then I'm not sure if that, I mean, I'm not an expert in the field, that we might have already had that really high growth, but we should expect real estate to do strong. And then once society starts to fall apart and we have a deflationary period, then you'd expect real estate prices to go down and stabilize. But I have no idea when that would be. Like the 19th century was not an era of high real estate valuation because society was industrializing, people were moving to the colonies. And so there was an equilibrium between real estate value and between the population and the economy. And like I moved to California recently, real estate prices will stay high here until they change the code that means you can build more buildings, because fundamentally California needs to build a lot more houses for the population it has. And I can't see that happening until the entire old regime gets axed, because the old regime is dependent upon people. Real estates are built upon having scarcity.
Yeah, but the new regime will inherit that property from the old regime,
Yes.
right? And so it's like the riddle I always talk about. The riddle is, what do you call a developer? Someone who wants to build a house, right? What do you call an environmentalist? Someone who already owns a house. Okay, and
Yes.
and as long as they've got theirs, they want to limit the supply.
I
right?
mean, that's what I see in a lot of the left, where there's a really fascinating theory called the managerial theory. Actually, it's not a theory, it's just reality, let's be honest.
Right.
Where the idea is that modern society since World War II has been taken over by managers. And this is one of the things I've been thinking about because it's so strange to see the left be a coalition between the poor, the largest corporations, and socialists. Because you think, wait, why do the corporations and socialists work together? And the reality is because it's the same social class, the managers. And this is something I was talking to Jason before we started this about this, is that you can look across history and see certain social classes very clearly pushing their interests. In the ancient world, priests would design their whole society. So every single thing you have to do, you'd have to pay a priest to be safe from some spirit. The knights in Europe tried to make it so that they could nickel and dime the peasants for everything. And the managerial theory goes that the dominant class in the West since World War II has been managers, people who work in companies managing said companies, people who, bureaucrats in the government. And that's why we've seen such bloat in middle management jobs. And that's why the government's grown so much. And what the managers do is they try to make it so that everything in society is a problem that they have to fix, which is why we have all these grievance studies and all these people saying they're victims. And the managers can't really, I don't see them holding on to power because they're doing an ineffective job. And also woke managers control every institution of society, a lot of corporations, Hollywood, which is part of the media, the World Economic Forum, the government, and even stuff like sports leagues where you think, why are woke people in the NFL?
I know, it makes no sense. But I interviewed the author of Woke Inc. He's been on the show. His book is fascinating. I'm not sure if you've read it, but a lot of this woke stuff is just cover for the other bad deeds they're doing. Right? It's a distraction. It's a smokescreen to hide all of the other just blatantly greedy, oppressive things that these companies or sports teams are doing, or movie studios, whatever, right? Yes. They're all businesses in essence.
I mean, I'm sure you've seen the thing of Harvey Weinstein saying, oh, yeah, we need to help women and sexual harassment and women need freedom. And then the dude was raping dozens of women on the side.
Yeah, no, I know. It's absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, it's amazing that people fall for words rather than actions. The rule of life is don't talk about it, be about it. Right? That's what, show by example. That's the reality of it. But hey, I could talk to you for hours, but unfortunately we've got to wrap it up. And I'm just really looking forward to having you at Empowered Investor Live. And folks, go to jasonhartman.com, get your tickets. We are close to selling out for that event. VIP is totally sold out, so no more VIP tickets. We only have the elite tickets and the general admission. Go get your tickets today. And Rudyard, just wrap it up for us, or anything you want to get people ready for the conference. And we're just really looking forward to hosting you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited to go to the conference. And if you guys want to come and see me, buy tickets. My channel is always on the internet, so you can check out What If Altist if you like. And just thank you.
Yeah, your channel's great. I'd highly recommend it. So I will tell you about your branding. It took me a little while to figure out the name.
Yeah, because I don't make the same kind of content anymore, because for the first 7 years I did alternate history, and then because I made the channel when I was on my 13th birthday, actually. And I was obsessed with
amazing.
Thanks. And I was obsessed with a thing called alternate history. It's like, what if the Nazis won World War II, and just trying to happen from that. And I did that for 7 years. And then when I was 19 or something, I gained all this actual real world knowledge through trying to do it. And I thought, why don't I just make videos that are actually about the real world? And I really haven't looked back. And people tell me to do alternate history, But my honest, blunt opinion is it just seems like it's fanfic of the real world. And like how a lot of real writers start writing Harry Potter fanfic, and then their Harry Potter fanfic evolves into being what their actual work is as a writer.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. I mean, that show, Man in the High Tower, is that the name of it? The Amazon Prime? High Castle. Yeah. That's alternate history. And it really is interesting to ask yourself, what if? Because one of the things I'm constantly saying on the show is you can't hear the dogs that don't bark.
Yes.
And that is one of the core principles that I think really intelligent people always consider. The profound effect of what is unseen, or the profound impact of what didn't happen. Everybody looks at what did happen or what they can see, but they don't look at what could have happened or didn't happen, right? Very much. And so there's very little to talk about that. So that alternate history is really interesting. But listen, your contemporary version of your channel is awesome too.
Thank you.
And hey, now that you are a mature person at age 21, I just can't believe it. I mean, folks, think about it. It is an amazing time to be alive, where a kid who's 13 years old can start a YouTube channel, grow this giant audience with fascinating content, and then here you are today. It's just a real testament to this stuff. But, before you go, I did want you to give our listeners a recommendation for that book about inflation cycles. I can't remember the name of it.
It's The Great Wave by David Hackett Fischer. It's the best economic history I've ever read. Yeah. It's a history of inflation over the last 1,000 years, and it shows how you can look at these cycles of inflation to figure out when societies have civil wars, when they have massive social tension. And it's remarkable, and it's only 200 pages as well. So you could read it on a single long flight.
Yeah, good stuff. No, that is a great book. I ordered it, and it's really interesting. And for income property investors, one of the beautiful things about inflation is my technique of inflation-induced debt destruction. That inflation basically destroys the debt on your property. That is the hidden wealth creator. What's that? That's
a really common thing across history, where I'm an example a lot of people probably know is the whole silver versus gold debate in the America of 130 years ago, where the farmers and the little guy wanted silver because it would just inflate the currency and erase their debts. Well, the owners of capital wanted to have gold because gold was more stable.
Yeah, no, it's really quite interesting. I mean, inflation is basically a bailout program for debtors. It's fascinating. Well, Rudyard, listen, we could go on forever, but I look forward to seeing you at the conference. Thank you for coming on today, and we will wrap it up for now. And check out his YouTube channel, folks. What If Alt History? Really fascinating channel. Rudyard Lynch, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.